The story of Job in the Bible is a profound narrative that delves into the depths of human suffering, faith, and divine justice. At its core, it is a story that challenges our understanding of the relationship between God and humanity and the nature of righteousness. Through the experiences of Job, his friends, and his encounters with God, we glean valuable lessons about perseverance, humility, and the complexities of life. The book of Job opens with a scene in the heavenly court where God boasts about Job, describing him as a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. But have you thought of developing a deeper relationship with Jesus? Here we bring to you Steps to Christ, a book that will take you step by step to experience Jesus and in an easy and understandable biblical teaching. Get yourself a copy through the link in the description. Now, however, Satan challenges this assertion, arguing that Job's devotion is merely a result of God's blessings and protection. Satan proposes that if these blessings were taken away, Job would curse God to his face. God grants Satan permission to test Job, but with the stipulation that he cannot harm Job's person. Thus begins a series of calamities that befall Job in rapid succession. He loses his livestock, servants, and all 10 of his children in a series of tragic events. Despite these devastating losses, Job remains faithful, declaring, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Satan, unsatisfied, argues that Job will only curse God if he is afflicted personally. God grants Satan permission to afflict Job with painful boils from head to toe. Job's suffering intensifies, and he is left sitting in ashes, scraping his sores with broken pottery. Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, hear of his plight and come to comfort him. Initially, they sit with him in silence, sharing in his grief. However, when they begin to speak, their words are not words of comfort, but rather accusations. They adhere to the conventional wisdom of the time, suggesting that Job must have committed some grave sin to deserve such suffering. They urge Job to repent and seek God's forgiveness, believing that his suffering is a punishment for his sins. Job vehemently maintains his innocence, insisting that he has done nothing to deserve such suffering. He questions why he is being punished, pleading for an audience with God to argue his case. Despite his cries for understanding, God remains silent. The dialogue between Job and his friends unfolds over several cycles, with Job becoming increasingly frustrated and despondent as his friends continue to accuse him. He wrestles with profound questions about the nature of suffering, the justice of God, and the meaning of life. In one of the most poignant moments in the story, Job expresses his longing for a mediator, a redeemer, who could plead his case before God and vindicate him. He declares, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me." Finally, after Job and his friends have exhausted their arguments, God breaks his silence and speaks to Job out of a whirlwind. Instead of providing answers to Job's questions, God responds with a series of questions that highlight the limits of human understanding and the vastness of divine wisdom. God challenges Job to contemplate the mysteries of creation, asking if he was present when the foundations of the earth were laid, or if he can command the dawn to break or the stars to appear. Through this encounter, Job is humbled and acknowledges the greatness and sovereignty of God. In the end, God rebukes Job's friends for speaking falsely about him and commands them to make offerings for their wrongdoing. He then restores Job's fortunes, blessing him with twice as much wealth as he had before and granting him another 10 children. The story of Job concludes with Job's restoration and vindication, emphasizing the importance of faithfulness in the face of suffering and the incomprehensibility of God's ways. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in the midst of life's trials and tribulations, God remains sovereign and just. From the story of Job, we learn several important lessons. 1. The nature of suffering. Job's story forces us to confront the reality of suffering in the world. It challenges simplistic notions of cause and effect, showing that suffering is not always the result of personal sin or divine punishment. Instead, it can be a part of the human experience, even for the most righteous individuals. 2. The limits of human understanding. Job's friends represent the conventional wisdom of their time, believing that they can explain and justify Job's suffering based on their understanding of God's justice. However, their explanations fall short, highlighting the limitations of human knowledge and understanding in the face of divine mysteries. Exploring the limits of human understanding in the story of Job reveals a profound theological and philosophical inquiry into the nature of suffering, divine justice, and the human condition. The characters of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, serve as archetypes of human wisdom and theological interpretation, demonstrating the inherent limitations of human knowledge when confronted with the mysteries of God's ways. The friends' initial response to Job's suffering is one of empathy and compassion. They travel from their own lands to comfort him, sitting with him in silence for 7 days and nights, sharing in his grief. However, their silence is soon broken by their attempts to offer explanations for Job's suffering based on their understanding of divine justice and retribution. Eliphaz, the first of Job's friends to speak, appeals to his own experiences and observations to argue that suffering is the inevitable consequence of sin. He asserts that God punishes the wicked and rewards the righteous, implying that Job must have committed some hidden transgression to deserve his suffering. Bildad, the second friend to speak, echoes Eliphaz's sentiments, arguing that Job's suffering is the result of his own wrongdoing. He appeals to tradition and received wisdom, citing the teachings of their ancestors as evidence of the inevitability of suffering for the wicked. Bildad's worldview is characterized by a rigid adherence to tradition and authority, which he believes provides a reliable guide to understanding God's ways. Zophar, the third friend to speak, takes a more confrontational approach, accusing Job of arrogance and presumption. He warns Job against claiming to understand the mysteries of God's wisdom, insisting that his suffering is a just punishment for his sins. Zophar's worldview is marked by a dogmatic insistence on the absolute sovereignty of God and the need for humility and submission before divine authority. Despite their differing approaches, all three friends share a common assumption: that they can explain and justify Job's suffering based on their understanding of God's justice. However, their explanations fall short, revealing the inherent limitations of human knowledge and understanding in the face of divine mysteries. The friends' theological interpretations are based on a narrow understanding of divine justice as a simple, linear equation of cause and effect, reward and punishment. They fail to grasp the complexities of human experience and the inscrutable ways of God, reducing suffering to a moral calculus that overlooks the deeper dimensions of Job's predicament. Job, in contrast, challenges their simplistic explanations and asserts his innocence in the face of his suffering. He refuses to accept their accusations and demands an audience with God to plead his case. His quest for understanding leads him to wrestle with profound questions about the nature of suffering, the justice of God, and the meaning of life. Job's encounter with God in the whirlwind marks a turning point in the story, where he is confronted with the limitations of his own understanding and the vastness of divine wisdom. Instead of providing answers to Job's questions, God responds with a series of questions that challenge Job to contemplate the mysteries of creation and acknowledge the limits of human knowledge. Through this encounter, Job is humbled and comes to recognize the inadequacy of his own wisdom in the face of God's infinite wisdom. He acknowledges the sovereignty and mystery of God's ways, declaring, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." You asked, "Who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge?" Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. The story of Job challenges us to confront the limits of our own understanding and humility in the face of life's mysteries. It reminds us that our attempts to explain and justify suffering often fall short, and that true wisdom lies in acknowledging the sovereignty of God and trusting in His goodness and justice, even when we cannot fully comprehend His ways. 3. The importance of faithfulness. Despite his immense suffering, Job remains faithful to God. His steadfastness serves as a powerful example of faith in the midst of adversity, showing that true faith is not contingent on prosperity or comfort, but is grounded in a deep trust in God's goodness and sovereignty. Job's unwavering faithfulness in the midst of profound suffering stands as a beacon of hope and inspiration for believers throughout the ages. His story not only demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit, but also provides profound insights into the nature of true faith and its transformative power in the face of adversity. Job's faithfulness is evident from the outset of his ordeal. Despite losing his wealth, his possessions, and even his children in rapid succession, Job refuses to renounce his faith in God. Instead of cursing God for his misfortune, Job utters the now famous words, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." This declaration of faith reveals Job's deep trust in God's sovereignty and goodness, even in the midst of unimaginable loss and suffering. It underscores the fundamental conviction that true faith transcends circumstances and is rooted in an unshakable confidence in God's character and promises. Job's faithfulness is further tested when he is afflicted with painful boils from head to toe. Despite the excruciating agony of his physical condition and the emotional anguish of his situation, Job refuses to abandon his trust in God. He sits among the ashes, scraping his sores with broken pottery, yet his faith remains unshaken. Job's response to his suffering challenges conventional notions of faith as a mere transactional relationship with God, where blessings are exchanged for obedience. Instead, Job's faith is characterized by a deep sense of trust and surrender, grounded in a profound understanding of God's sovereignty and goodness.